Welcome to the first episode of the EST podcasts. We are your hosts, Emily, Stephanie, and Timbri. In this episode, we are discussing a very interesting book, Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. Now, this book follows the lives of two people, but today we're just going to be focusing on the serial killer H.H. Holmes.
In this book, Erik Larson created two separate but connected plot lines. One is focusing on Daniel Burnham, the architect who built the World's Fair. Another centers on H.H. Holmes, the serial killer who used the World's Columbian Exposition as his murdering weapon. In this episode, we will specifically analyze H.H. Holmes and how Larson depicts his skills of manipulation and charm to commit crimes.
So to better understand this character, we have to go back in time and review his timeline. So let's start from 1893, the Columbian Exposition. During that time, Holmes opened up his home as a hotel for visitors. His murderous ways start to show next year when he first killed his two victims, Julia and Pearl Connor. So Ned Connor was the person that was working at Holmes' pharmacy, and Julia was his wife and Pearl was his daughter. But then Julia and Ned actually got a divorce, and Julia later got pregnant with Holmes' kid. And Holmes lied to Julia, telling her that go get an abortion and then I'll marry you. But instead of taking her to get the abortion, Julia was actually killed by him, and later daughter was also killed. Holmes always married new women, and he moves on very quickly. He married his third wife, Georgiana Yoke. Well, he's still married to two other women, and none of his wives know about one another. Moving on to July, Holmes faked his own death to claim a $20,000 insurance. He's not phased and then tries to make Ben Pitzel, who is his business partner, to fake his own death for $10,000 in insurance. Holmes told Pitzel that he would find another body to act as his. But little did he know that was a lie. Holmes buried Pitzel alive.
Now, I think this is where we really start to see his pattern, Holmes's pattern with killing people, and it's almost always for money. And when he was a med student at the University of Michigan, before this whole thing happened, he would steal the bodies from the lab and turn them into authorities in order to claim money. And so Holmes didn't show any sympathy for these victims and just saw them as essentially ways to bring in money for himself.
We also see that Holmes uses his charisma to attract women to fall into this trap, and he doesn't show any sympathy. He always just seduce them and kill them. And we see this pattern over and over again whenever he wants to kill, and basically he uses his own advantage, which is charm, to get girl after girl.
And also Larson kept describing how good looking he is, how he has really beautiful blue eyes. That's one thing that's one of the reasons why he got girls, but also he probably has really high emotional intelligence, meaning there's methods or strategies that he's using that is making him so successful in terms of getting girls. And this is an ability that not everyone has. Most of us don't constantly get the people to fall in love with us. So that really shows his intelligence.
Also, Larson uses a lot of detailed description of how Holmes interact with people that are around him. In certain parts of the storyline, there's also this little detail that Larson intentionally left for the readers to reflect on or kind of find out something more about Holmes after each chapter. when I was reading it, it feels like the image of Holmes is slowly revealed by Larson, and there's also this mysterious tone that Larson uses when he's describing Holmes, which adds up to his personality.
Yeah, I agree. And like the way Larson makes the scenes, it's like there's an element of coldness to Holmes that his victims and the people around him don't seem to see, but we as the readers see it because we know that he's a serial killer. So it's like he is so good at masking his lack of emotion with charm and with his beauty and his stunning blue eyes, as Larson mentions over and over again.
Right. Moving forward, as the World's Fair kicks off, many women went missing. Some are suspicious of Holmes, but to the ones that matter, he's innocent. He kills 27 people, or so he claims later, using the sphere as a disguise. Then Holmes started killing Ben Pitzel's kids. He started with Howard, who is the son. When Holmes took the Pitzel kids up to Indianapolis, he chopped poor Howard into pieces and then burned those pieces in an oven. After he's dead, Holmes burns Pitzel's 2 daughters alive and then buries them.
And that's when he is back in Chicago. He buries them in his hotel cellar.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, Holmes had already killed Gertrude Connor, Julia Connor, Pearl Connor, Benjamin Pitzel, Emmeline Segrand, Minnie Williams, Anna Williams, Howard Pitzel, Nellie Pitzel, and Alice Pitzel. And this is also when Frank Geyer, the detective, comes to investigate and uncover his past criminal activity. So in November of 1894, Holmes is arrested in Boston. In the summer of 1895, Holmes is put on trial for trying to defraud an insurance company, to which he pleads guilty. And that's what really kicks off the whole uncovering of Holmes' murder castle. As previously mentioned, Geyer gets hired. He seems to be the only one who thinks that Holmes is everything but an innocent man. Suspecting Holmes has killed several people, including the Pitzel children, Geyer began his investigation, and Geyer was able to track Holmes' murder route across the Midwest, trying to find the missing children. In August of 1895, Holmes' hotel erupts in flames, and he's put on trial for the murder of Pitzel and confesses to 27 murders and 6 attempted. In spring of 1896, Holmes was hanged for these murders. He requested he be buried in concrete so that no one would ever tear apart his body. He is.
Alright, so now that we know what happened, let's figure out who it happened to. We're going to start with Frank Geyer, who is the detective assigned to investigate Holmes. So his case was investigated while he was in prison, and Geyer was not having any of this "I'm innocent" stuff. He did not think Holmes was innocent, and he kept tracing the little clues he could find, and he discovered far more crimes that Holmes previously committed. I mean, he was only investigating the murder of Ben Pitzel, but he found so many more. And second, we have Ned Connor, who was the husband of Julia and Pearl. And Julia got involved with Holmes and became his mistress after Ned went back to their hometown, but she didn't go with him. She stayed with Holmes because Ned knew that something was up, so he left them. And like we said, she and her daughter were murdered later by Holmes. And Emmeline Segrand was seduced by Holmes, as were like all of his other victims, and she moved to Chicago for a job offering. She moved from up north. And Holmes proposed to her under another name. That's a thing he did. He said he was a different person for each person he married and seduced. And then he murdered her later, obviously. And Minnie Williams was Holmes's love. She was one of the longest living victims before he eventually did kill her too. And he reconnected with her, married with her from years prior, but then, of course, he lied to her and killed her. And Anna Williams was Minnie Williams' sister. And she also was deceived by Holmes. He said that they would all, him, Minnie, and Anna, they would all go to the World's Fair and have a great time. And he convinced Anna to move down to Chicago and actually stay there for a long period of time. And she did, and of course he killed her too, though.
And now let's talk about the umbrella Holmes uses as a disguise for his murders: the World's Fair. The World's Fair, or the World's Columbian Exposition, was held in Chicago to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' discovery of the Americas in 1492. The fair attracted approximately 27 million people during the 6 months period and became an extremely important social and cultural event. And it was made possible by the combined effort from many architects, workers, politicians, and many more. The fair opened in May and ran through October 30, 1893. The fair also had an amusement section, which is the famous Ferrisville, built by George Washington Gale Ferris Jr.
Okay, after all these background information, let's dive deep into the book and talk about some quotes and some specific scenes that are very iconic and worth talking about, so we can have a better understanding of the characters of H.H. Holmes. So I chose this chapter called Claustrophobia. In this chapter, Holmes lied to Anna, who is his current wife, Minnie's sister, by telling her that he wanted to take her to look at art schools during their tour of his hotel, because he told her that she's really talented. However, this is a total lie, just an excuse for him to kill her. And now I'm gonna read parts from this killing scene. The panic came, as it always did. Holmes imagined Anna crumpled in a corner. If he chose, he could rush to the door, throw it open, hold her in his arms, and weep with her at the tragedy just barely averted. He could do it at the last minute, and the last few seconds. He could do that. Or he could open the door and look in on Anna and give her a big smile, just to let her know that this was no accident, then close the door again, slam it, and return to his chair to see what might happen next. Or he could flood the vault, right now, with gas. The hiss and repulsive odor would tell her just as clearly as a smile that something extraordinary was underway. He could do any of these things. He had to concentrate to hear the sobs from within. The airtight fittings, the iron walls, and the mineral wool insulation deadened most of the sound. But he had found with experience that if he listened at the gas pipe, he heard everything much more clearly. This was the time he most craved. It brought him a period of sexual release that seemed to last for hours, even though in fact the screams and pleading faded rather quickly. He filled the vault with gas, just to be sure.
Now I want to talk about a specific part of this quote that I found really interesting. We're going to go back to, he had to concentrate to hear the sobs from within, which first of all, chills down my spine. It was a chilling part of this scene. But if he had to concentrate, why did he suffocate his victims and like make them? I mean, he killed them quickly, but in like an airtight room. Why not just like bring them out and kill them so that he could hear them scream? I know that sounds terrible, but if that's what he wanted, why didn't he just do that? And I mean, I guess he is in a hotel and he has guests there, but we know he killed Howard up in Indianapolis, so why can't he just go on a quote vacation with his victims and just never take them back to Chicago? And it also creates the same little snippet creates a really interesting like juxtaposition kind of thing, because on one side of a wall somebody is dying and in pain and agony, and on the other side someone's just deadpan and concentrating, which is really a huge contrast that also like contributes to the chillingness of this part.
I think, yeah, it's kind of weird that he has to like be hiding and listen to those screams. If he just go into a room and like just hear the screams from the victim directly or see the pain on their face, would probably bring more satisfaction. But maybe for Holmes it's different, because later he said like it brought him a period of sexual release. Sounds weird to me, but also maybe by listening to those sounds behind the door, not directly seeing the pain on their faces, on the victims' faces, he could probably like imagine those images in his head, and like the sounds help him to like reach his climax.
It sounds terrible, but I mean, that's what he did. That's why he's a serial killer.
Yeah, he probably has like really weird fetish with like behavior.
Yeah, like a sexual fantasy of pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I want to connect to how Larson constructs the scene. And in the scene and also throughout the book, he uses a God point of view, so which means that we can see the characters and we can hear what the characters are saying, and we can like you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
We see it from different perspectives. It's not just one-sided, from this third-person view. And I think Larson did a very good job creating this psychological thrill to the readers by giving as much detail as he can. And also he's very straightforward. He doesn't just hide the details, he explicitly shows the details to the reader. So for instance, there's parts where he just mentions that the victim, Anna, she's trapped and Holmes is listening. So it's clearly Holmes is going to murder Anna. And this very straightforward style also adds to the suspense, because we know what's going on next, but the character Anna doesn't.
I think those detailed descriptions really help the readers to build like an image of like the struggles that Anna is going through, like the vulnerability that Anna is experiencing, because she has no clue. Like, I think she's more scared when she feels like dying, but she's not sure like what is going on, because like the gas is in the vault, but like you know what I mean, like when someone wants to kill you,
Yeah.
they go directly to you with a knife. At least before you die, you know you're killed by this person, by a knife. But now you're trapped in a room and there's no one there, no one is helping you, and like you're slowly suffocating, and you're trying to figure out, wait, what happened? Where's Holmes? Is he the person that's releasing those gas? Like, what's going on? And before she dies, she's like all confused and like vulnerable and like having like a mental crisis, and like she's struggling both mentally and physically, and that's like more painful than just being physically just like attacked by the killer.
Right. And I also want to talk about like his use of almost a parallel structure in he said like he could do any of these things. He could do XYZ, right? He could sympathize with her. He could give her a big smile to let her know what's going on. He could just kill her. Which connects to what you were saying, Steph, about how it's like more painful because not only are you dying, you don't have that like conclusion to yourself, right? And that really, the way Larson did that with that parallel structure really adds an element of like sympathy for Anna and Holmes' other victims.
Well, it also shows that Holmes has full control over Anna, as
Right.
he could do these, he had these options, and he chose the most painful options, that which killed Anna, and that also creates sympathy for her. And as readers, because we're seeing all these killing from a third person's point of view, we would naturally worry about Anna, and it kind of closes the distance between the character and also reader.
Yeah, it really shows us how insane Holmes is. Like the method he uses, and also I think his method is more cruel than just killing someone with a knife directly.
Oh dear.
And shall we move on to another scene that I found? So basically, the following scene is when the two daughters of Carrie and Benjamin Pitzel were found dead outside of Walker's house, and they were found by Detective Gayer. The children had been buried nude. Alice lay on her side, her head at the west end of the grave. Nellie lay face down, partially covering Alice. Her rich black hair, nicely plaited, lay along her back as neatly as if she had just combed it. The men spread a sheet on the cellar floor. They began with Nellie. "We lifted her as gently as possible," Geyer said, but owing to the decomposed state of the body, the weight of her plaited hair hanging down her back pulled the skull from her head. They discovered something else. Nellie's feet had been amputated. During the search of the residence that followed, police found no trace of them. At first, this seemed a mystery, until Geyer recalled that Nellie was club-footed. Holmes had disposed of her feet to remove this distinctive clue to her identity.
I don't really get why he would kill those kids, because they didn't do anything wrong and there's no point killing them, and he doesn't really profit that much from them. I think it's because it's just trying to satisfy his need for killing. Like, I feel like murdering people with his special method is like an obsessive behavior that he needs to do on a regular basis. And like the way he treated those bodies, like cutting off parts and like he probably yeah. And like going back to the part that I talked about, like having sexual release from listening to people suffering and like treating bodies in a certain way, I'm wondering like if he ever gets satisfaction, or like if he's ever happy in a romantic relationship, since he's already having like climaxes in killing people. Does he really feel like satisfied when he's with women, even though those women that he has been with are beautiful and he's so good at using his charisma to attract them? Is he a sociopath, like trying to act a certain way to manipulate
I think what
people?
terrifies me the most is how he's proud of his killing. And from the book, we know that he went to medical school, and he has the technical skills to dissect and kill people in a way that only doctors can. So he's really proud of the murders he can do. I remember towards the end, he was in prison, but then he had this like smirk scene that he's proud that the detectives can't find anything. That's like, that scene really just terrifies me, because even when he's receiving a punishment for what he's doing, he's still not. He doesn't feel bad for what he does. He feels even more proud because people can't figure out what he's doing, and
he's like so proud of his intelligence and ability to manipulate that he doesn't feel like the sympathy that we do as an audience. That a lot of, like, going back to Larson's techniques in the book, he makes us feel the sympathy that Holmes didn't have for his victims. And it fascinates me how Holmes is so good at putting on a mask to get people to essentially kill. He is like, his mask of, oh, I'm so happy and I love you and I'm gonna marry you. It's just, it worked every time. Well, almost every time he would try to seduce these women, and he would. And that's just the amount of intelligence it takes to be able to completely fake human emotions and make it seem genuine is just like terrifyingly amazing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, also I remember when all the creditors, like all the people that like he has debts, yeah, and they had a meeting, and like Holmes went, and then he talks himself out of the situation, which is like, not only he's good with women, he's good with all kinds of people, and that's really fascinating.
Right.
Yeah, it's like this duality of his personality. On one side, he seems normal, he's charismatic, he is charming, he's handsome, and he's good with people. But then on the other side, we get to see Holmes as this antagonist who is cold-hearted, lacks sympathy, and also enjoys murdering. So this contrast between these two characteristics really shows Larson's skills in portraying Holmes, this character.
Yeah, and actually, I think Holmes see this situation, like after he got caught and he's in prison and he's sentenced to death, he still thinks he's the person that's winning, you know? Because he even said, oh, I want to be put in a coffin, you know? Like, he knows he's gonna die eventually, but for, like, the years that he wasn't being caught, he has done so many crimes, and from each crimes he got so much satisfaction, to a point where now, even though he's finally facing consequences, for him it's worth it, because it brought him happiness, and now, well, like, he's satisfied already, and that's why he's not he doesn't feel that bad about being in prison.
And it's like such a cold-blooded thing, the way he says, like, I want to be buried in cement so that they can't do what I did to them. It's like, it's terrible, because he's assuming that there are other, like, sick, twisted people like him out in the world, and it's just like, to top it all off, he's still putting himself above people. He's always, like, thinks he's so intelligent and smart, and even when he's dead, he's saying, don't let them mistreat me. Like, you know, which is, like, insane.
And also, after he died, a lot of bad things continue to happen. So his spirit, like, his ghost is still around.
Yeah. And that will conclude our pilot episode of the EST podcast. We hope you all enjoyed listening, and We'll see you
See you
next
next time.
Bye.